Well folks, welcome to day 4 of 5 already of Special Projects' third selection, or pack number 3 if you will. This one is one of the standouts for me personally out of the 10 that I chose to do this time. It's a car which I'd considered doing a racing build of some kind for. It has fantastic visual upgrades, and it would potentially make a very nice rival for the Ferrari that I did in a similar style in the second pack last month. This one has some advantages, some disadvantages, but they compare quite nicely, and just visually, I love the look of this car. Now, it's not a car that many of us will be probably too familiar with, not the Pantera, but this specific version. It is a real car, and it is not one that I'd known about. I saw it randomly while looking through all the different designs to look for a racing one that caught my eye. A community member, this member in particular, did a design for it. The link, of course, is in the description. I googled it, saw just how good the livery looked that they'd done, how accurate it was to the real car, and just how badass this car looks. GT40 vibes out the wazoo, and just the potential that it has with the real-world specs that I could find for reference. This is a beast of a car. It sits well under 700 points, which is super useful as well, and it is so much fun to drive, while still feeling authentic. So, in order to build this one, if I recall correctly, I think you will want to fit the wide body, as you could see, to get the aero package in full for this one. Aside from that though, it's of course a race car, so a lot of things are fairly obvious in terms of fitting them. Stage 1 weight, of course. Then as far as the club sport, you want the high lift cams, bored out engine. I don't recall if the bored out engine is accurate to real life. I think it wasn't, but we needed to get the right amount of power, so you have to make some exceptions sometimes. As far as the weight, again, that is stage 2 fitted. The power restrictor is fitted, not necessarily needed, but as I've said before, it's nice to have it. The ballast, of course, is fitted as well. We've got the fully customised computer, the racing crank, the fully customised diff, stage 3 reduction. I have increased the body rigidity on this particular car, and then for the race parts, we've stroked out the engine, balance tuning as well, polished the ports, the racing filter, racing silencer, manifold, pads and discs, clutch and flywheel, suspension, of course the transmission. Interestingly though, I've opted not to fit the transmission. I wanted it to have that almost lag that the standard gearbox has, where you're really like jamming the gear into place with all that power going through it, because I wanted it to not just be quick, but to feel old school. I don't want the car to feel too good in a funny kind of way. So I have bought it, but you don't necessarily need to. If you want to give yourself a little bit of an extra advantage or work the gearbox for, racing it, then absolutely. But for this one, I'm not running it with that. We've got racing hards fitted, of course, and for the extreme stuff, nothing's fitted there. So fairly simple in terms of the upgrades themselves. Like I said, you can add the visual design via the link below to add it to your library. Now, in real life, it seemed, at least from the specs that I could find, that there's a bit of a range in terms of the power and weight that this car had. So we're working within that range at 488 horsepower, 1250 kilos. So pretty nice numbers, not overly heavy, but pretty powerful for a car of its time. So we've got the racing hards. Then, as far as the suspension, we've dropped the ride height to only 5mm higher than the lowest. It's actually still got quite a lot of clearance though, because it's an older car. We've got 6 on the anti-roll, 36 on the compression for dampers, 44 for the rebound, 3.2 for the frequency, front and back, so very high on that one. 2 degrees of camber. Probably not as high as you might expect for that one. As far as the tow, we've towed in 30 on the rear, towed 10 out on the front. That really does help with stability. As far as the diff, we've got 15, 45 and 35. I would describe this particular car, and you'll see in a second, as being surprisingly forgiving. You'd probably think, especially because it's a road car that we've then turned into a race car, it might be a bit squirrely. It's actually really nice to drive. One of the reasons why it's one of my favourite builds that I've done so far. Like I said, I've left the transmission standard, so decide for yourself if you want to do that or not. The power restrictor is untouched. The ECU, though, is set to 98%, with 143 kilos of ballast, so quite a lot, and I've put that all the way to the front to bring us pretty close to a 50-50 split, which definitely does help with the handling and the stability. Rear downforce is nothing because it doesn't have the wing, and I've set the front as high as it can go. That is, of course, part of the reason why at some circumstances, or in some circumstances, it becomes less stable at higher speeds than it is at lower speeds. It's kind of like the exact opposite to the Ferrari that I did, but we'll get more into what I'm talking about there when we take it out on the track in a second. And then for the rest here, you can see all the stuff that I've fitted. as I spoke about just now. So check that against what you've done, make sure all of those are fitted, and now of course we will jump out to the track, to Spa in particular, to show you what this beast can do. Now, what I'm talking about when it comes to the stability is this is shockingly easy to drive at low speeds. It's almost like a muscle car vibe, but with almost borderline touring car kind of handling. And until you try it, you can't really fully understand what I mean, but I think, especially if you did the Ferrari build from last month and then try this one, I think you'll probably like this one more. Because the Ferrari had a lot of, fun factor to it, a lot of charisma, a lot of personality, but it's a little bit twitchy, it's fairly light. The extra weight of this one, the fact that it's more torque-based than horsepower with that American V8, of course it suits me, but it also definitely has a Ford GT40 kind of vibe, and for that I really love it. Ultimately, it's actually the higher speed corners where it has a tendency to step its tail out rather than low speed stuff, and I think part of the reason for that is the lack of rear downforce. Now, for example, for 90% of the lap here at Spa, it was more than stable enough. Super smooth, very easy to drive, really planted, really stable, and crucially, it feels really authentic as a race car. But then that long sweeping left, as you'll probably see in the replay, right before you get to the last S-bend, that is where it stepped its tail out, and I kind of squirreled around on the road a little bit. So it's those kind of 150 plus mile an hour corners where you'll want to keep an eye on the back end. For the lower speed stuff, you'll be fine. Overall, easily one of my favourite builds that I've done, not only in this pack, maybe even out of all three so far. It's a fantastic looking car. I'm glad that the player chose to do it because I was not familiar with the car, and it's ended up being probably one of my favourites, as I said. So if you haven't done the other builds already from this week, of course check those out and absolutely stick around for the rest that we have still to come. And until next time, I'll see you then with more. And for now, as always, thanks for watching.